Hello sports fans, welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my 2025 college football predictions. So we're going to be going over my season preview and predictions for all Power 4 teams plus Notre Dame, and then eventually we'll also go over my Heisman winner as well as my college football playoff predictions. But going conference by conference, starting off in the ACC, and finishing 17th or last in the conference, I've got Stanford. Stanford, they had a rough year last year, going just 3-9, and I think they're going to be pretty bad once again. Their head coach is former NFL head coach Frank Reich, and he's actually their interim head coach to replace Troy Taylor, while Andrew Luck, who's now their GM, searches for a new head coach. But the team Frank Reich has to work with isn't great. They got a new quarterback, and that is Oregon State transfer Ben Gulbranson, and despite having 4 years at Oregon State, he doesn't have a ton of starting experience with just 12 starts. The weapons around him also aren't great, as there is replacing a ton of players with either transfers from FCS schools or players that are pretty unproven. Now, the offensive line for Stanford could be decent with 3 returning starters, but I don't expect this Stanford offense to be too great. I don't think they'll be great defensively either, and overall, I think Stanford's going to be pretty bad. They've gone 3-9 each of the past 4 years. I think they'll be in that range once again, but instead of 3-9, I've got them 2-10, 0-8 in conference play with wins over Hawaii and San Jose State. 16th in the ACC, I've got Wake Forest. So Wake Forest, they enter a new era after Dave Clawson retired after coaching the team for 11 years, and they brought in Washington State head coach Jake Dicker. But it might be a challenge for him in year 1 at Wake Forest, because this team is not very good. They've gone 4-8 each of the past 2 years, and I don't really think they'll be that great once again. At the quarterback spot, they've got Robbie Ashford or Deshaun Purdy battling for the starting job. But while the quarterback spot is pretty unknown, running back should be pretty good, as Desmond Claiborne is one of the best players on this Wake Forest team, as last year he ran for over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. Receiver, there's also a lot of new faces, with their top 4 receivers from last season no longer on the team, but Washington State transfer Carlos Hernandez, as well as a couple FCS transfers, should probably be the top targets. Then defensively for Wake Forest, they've got some decent players, but nothing too crazy, and I don't think their defense is going to be anything special. But this is a Wake Forest team with potential. I like their run game, and their defense could be okay, but I think the quarterback situation can hold this team back, and I don't think Wake Forest is anything too great. I've got them going 4-8 for the 3rd straight year, winless in conference play, with wins coming against Kennesaw State, Western Carolina, Oregon State, and Delaware. 15th in the ACC, I've got Boston College. So BC, they went 7-6 last year in year 1 under Bill O'Brien, but I think them having a winning record this year could be kind of tough. Offensively, they named Alabama transfer Dylan Watergan their starting quarterback, and he could be really good for them as a former 4-star recruit, although he's only attempted 8 passes in his college career. Now, outside of the quarterback spot, I think this run game might take a step back after they lost star running back Kai Robichaux, but I do like a couple of the receivers on this team, such as Willis Bond, who led the team in receiving last season. Now, the defense for BC is a little concerning. They lost their star pass rusher Donovan Ezeraku to the NFL, and the secondary is very young. But I think this Boston College team has a lot of potential. I like their passing offense, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. They play a pretty tough schedule, and I don't see them beating teams that are a lot better than them. I've got Boston College going 4-8, winning 2 games in conference play, wins over Fordham, Stanford, Cal, and UConn. 14th in the ACC, I've got Virginia, and they're an interesting team. They went 5-7 last year, which was improvement from the previous year, and I could see them being a pretty decent team once again. Although if they're not, it could be the end of the road for head coach Tony Elliott. But this Virginia offense, I think, should be pretty solid. Chandler Morris transferred in from North Texas, and he was quite good last season. And running back Xavier Brown also returns after he ran for just shy of 500 yards last season. Now, at the receiver spot, they lost their star Malachi Fields, but they brought in Notre Dame transfer Jaden Thomas and Purdue transfer Jamal Ederon. Then on the defensive side of things, Virginia was terrible last year, but they returned 6 starters and brought in some transfers, so I would expect some improvement on the defensive side of the ball. But this is a Virginia team that I definitely think they could be solid. They can definitely make a bowl game, but I've got them just missing out and finishing 5-7, 2-6 in ACC play. Wins over Coastal Carolina, William & Mary, Stanford, Washington State, and Wake Forest. Finishing in 13th in the ACC, I've got Cal. So Cal, they enter their 2nd year as a member of the ACC, and last year, they were pretty solid, going 6-7 and making a bowl game. But there's a lot of changes from last year's team to this year's team for Cal. It starts at the quarterback position. They named a freshman quarterback their starter, who I'm not going to try to say his name because you'll see why when you see it, but I'll just pop it up on screen. But they named him their starting quarterback as he beat out Ohio State transfer Devin Brown, and he definitely has a lot of potential being a former 4-star recruit. Now, outside of the quarterback spot, there's a lot of transfers. At running back, they lost Jaden Ott to Oklahoma, but they brought in SMU transfer LJ Johnson and NC State transfer Kendrick Raphael. And I think together, those two can be a pretty good duo. Then at the receiver position, they also lost some key players from last season, but replaced them with transfers led by Purdue's Jaden Dixon-Veal. Then on the defensive side of things for Cal, they were quite good last season, although they lost a lot of production from last year's defense and returned just 3 starters. But this is a Cal team with a lot of potential. They've got a young quarterback, and if he's good, I can see Cal winning 7 or 8 games. But I do think there is some weaknesses in this team that will prevent Cal from reaching their ceiling. But I've got Cal going 5-7 overall, 2-6 in conference play. Wins against Texas Southern, Minnesota, San Diego State, Virginia, and Stanford. Finishing 12th in the ACC, I've got Syracuse. So it might be a little surprising to see Syracuse this low after they were great last year winning 10 games, but I think Syracuse is going to take a pretty big step back. And I think it's a combination of 2 things. They have a really tough schedule, and they lost a ton of key players from last year's team. And that starts at the quarterback position. Kyle McCord is now in the NFL after he was one of the best quarterbacks production-wise in the country. And they brought in Notre Dame transfer Steve Angeli to start. And while I do think Angeli will be solid, I don't think he's going to be Kyle McCord. Then at the running back spot, they're going to need somebody to step up after losing Queen Allen, who ran for 1,000 yards last year. And at receiver, it's pretty much the same thing. They lost their top 3 pass catchers from last season, although Darrell Gill could become the go-to receiver, as he looks to build on a season where he had 570 yards last year. The defense for Syracuse is also losing a lot, as they bring back just 3 starters from last year's team. But I expect Syracuse to take a pretty big step back. I think they're going to be better than their record suggests, but I do have them winning half as many games. I have them going 5-7, 3-5 in ACC play. I've got them beating UConn, Colgate, Duke, North Carolina, and Boston College. 11th in the ACC, I've got Virginia Tech. So Virginia Tech was one of my sleeper picks in the ACC last year. That didn't happen, but I think they could be decent this year. But quarterback Kyron Drones is back, and if he can stay healthy, I think he has the potential to be one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC, although I also said that last year. At the running back spot, they lost star running back Rachel Tootin, and his loss could really hurt after he ran for over 1,100 yards last season. But they replaced him with a couple transfers in Terrian Stewart from Bowling Green and Braden Bennett from Coastal Carolina. And I think that duo could be pretty solid, as both players ran for over 750 yards last season. Now, the receiver position is a big question for the Hokies, with their top 3 receivers being no longer on the team. And the offensive line is also a concern with 5 new starters. Now, defensively, Virginia Tech is okay. They were pretty solid last year, but only returned 2 starters. I think they'll be decent, but nothing too crazy. But I think that describes Virginia Tech's defense as well as them overall. I don't think they're going to be anything great. I've got them going 6-6, 3-5 in conference play. I've got them beating Vanderbilt, Old Dominion, Wofford, Wake Forest, Cal, and Virginia. Finishing 10th in the ACC, I've got North Carolina. So North Carolina is a very interesting team heading into this season. Obviously, they hired Bill Belichick to be their head coach, but he's never coached in college before, so there is a greater than 0 chance that he is terrible. Now, obviously, you wouldn't think so given his track record in the NFL, but it's definitely possible. But overall, I think North Carolina this season is going to be pretty solid, but I don't think there would be anything too crazy. They have not named a starting quarterback yet, and currently have a 3-way battle going on between last year's starter, Max Johnson, South Alabama transfer Gio Lopez, and 4-star freshman Bryce Baker. Outside of the quarterback spot, they will also start running back Amari Hampton to the NFL, although Davion Goss could be in line for a breakout year after he ran for 326 yards and 4 touchdowns as a freshman last season. Now, receiver is a similar spot to running back. They need somebody to step up after they lost their top 3 pass catchers. And then defensively, there is a lot of unknowns for North Carolina, but they have Bill Belichick, so I wouldn't expect this defense to be that bad. But this is a North Carolina team with a lot of unknowns entering this season, but also a lot of potential. I think they'll be pretty solid, but I've got them going 8-4. But I think the quarterback position could hold them back if they can't find a consistent starter. But I've got North Carolina 8-4 overall, 4-4 in the ACC, losing to Clemson, Syracuse, Duke, and NC State. Finishing 9th in the ACC, I've got Florida State. So Florida State is a very interesting team entering this season. Obviously, they were terrible last year, going 2-10, And I really don't know what to expect from them coming into this season. They could be great. They could go back to winning 10, 11 games. They could also win 2 games again. I really have no idea what to expect. But I think Florida State can be somewhere in between. But last year, a big problem for Florida State was quarterback. But they seem to have solved that problem with Boston College transfer Thomas Castellanos. And I think he should make a big impact right away with what he can do as both a passer and a runner. And I definitely think Castellanos will be used quite a bit as a runner, considering Florida State doesn't really have a proven running back on their roster. Although I do like Rodell Williams, and I think he can be a pretty good player. Now, at receiver, Florida State brought in Tennessee transfer Squirrel White, as well as Deuce Robinson from USC, and I think those two could be a pretty solid receiver duo for Thomas Castellanos to work with. Now, on the defensive side of things, I think they're going to be a lot better than they were last year. They brought in a bunch of transfers and hired a new defensive coordinator in Tony White. But I think this is a Florida State team that's not going to be amazing, but they're not going to be terrible. I've got them finishing 7-5, 5-3 in conference play, losses to Alabama, Miami, Clemson, NC State, and Florida. Finishing 8th in the ACC, I've got Duke. So Duke is coming off a great year in Season 1 under Manny Diaz, as they went 9-4. And I think they should be pretty good once again. They lost quarterback Malik Murphy in the transfer portal, but they brought in Tulane transfer Darian Mensah, who I think should be equally as good, if not better, than Malik Murphy. Now, on the ground, Duke needs to be a lot better than they were last year, but having running back Jarquez Moore back healthy, I think will definitely help. Plus, the offensive line for Duke is pretty good, as they return 4 starters. Now, an area I do worry about this Duke offense is the receiver position, as their top 2 receivers from last season are now in the NFL, but they do have some young guys who can step up, they're just pretty unproven. Now, on the defensive side of things, Duke was good last year, and I think they're going to be good once again, as they bring back 6 starters, and I think they're going to be one of the better defenses in the ACC. But Duke, they're a team, I think they're going to be pretty good. I think they might take a slight step back record-wise, because their schedule is more difficult, but I still think Duke is going to be an above-average team in the ACC. I've got them finishing 7-5 overall, 5-3 in the conference, losses to Illinois, Tulane, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, and Clemson. 7th in the ACC, I've got Georgia Tech. So Georgia Tech is definitely a team on the rise, as they've gone 7-6 back-to-back years, and I think they're doing pretty good once again. Quarterback Haynes King is back, and he's also healthy to start the year, and that's big for Georgia Tech, considering he battled injuries pretty much all of last season. But Haynes King is back, and so is running back Jamal Haynes, who ran for about 950 yards last season. Wide receiver Malik Rutherford is also back after he had about 700 receiving yards last year. So they got the playmakers on offense. The one thing I do worry about, though, is the offensive line, as it's a bit of a question with 3 new starters. The defense is also a bit of an unknown with a new defensive coordinator, plus they bring back just 4 starters. But Georgia Tech's team, I think they'll be pretty solid. I think they've got a high ceiling, but also a pretty low floor. But if everything goes right for Georgia Tech, I can see them winning 9 or 10 games. But I could also see them winning as few as 5 or 6. But I've got Georgia Tech somewhere in the middle of that range. I like what they have at the skill positions offensively, but I am a little concerned by the offensive line and defense. But I think Georgia Tech will be pretty solid. I've got them going 8-4, 5-3 in conference play. I've got them losing to NC State, Pitt, Georgia, and Clemson. 6th in the ACC, I've got NC State. NC State is another team with a lot of potential entering this season. And that potential starts at the quarterback spot. CJ Bailey was pretty good last year as a true freshman, and I think he's going to take a big step forward this season. And NC State's also got some pretty good playmakers around them. They bring back their leading rusher from last season in Hollywood Smothers, as well as their top 2 receivers from last season, including tight end Justin Jolie and receiver Noah Rogers. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, NC State really struggled last season, but they brought some transfers, and I do expect them to show some improvement. But this is an NC State team that I really like, especially offensively. I think CJ Bailey is going to be pretty good, especially with the playmakers around him. And while I don't think this is an NC State team that will win the ACC or make the college football playoff, I do think they're going to be a quietly good team. And I've got NC State going 8-4 overall, 5-3 in conference play, losing to Duke, Notre Dame, Pitt, and Miami. 5th in the conference, I've got Louisville. So Louisville has been very good in their first 2 years under head coach Jeff Brom, and I think they're doing pretty good once again. Offensively, they've got a new quarterback in USC transfer Miller Moss, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but I think will be pretty solid. But standing next to Miller Moss in the backfield is sophomore running back Isaac Brown, who was one of the better running backs in the country last year, running for over 1,100 yards as a true freshman. And Moss also has a pretty good go-to guy at receiver, with Chris Bell returning after he had 700 yards last season. Now, the offensive line and defense are both questions for Louisville entering this season, although they were very active in the transfer portal addressing both positions, so I do think they'll be pretty solid. But I think Louisville going to take a slight step back from where they were over the past 2 seasons, and I've got them finishing 5th in the ACC, going 9-3 overall, 5-3 in conference play, losing to Pitt, Miami, and Clemson. 4th in the ACC, I've got SMU. So SMU, they were one of the best teams in the ACC last year, ended up making the conference championship game, and actually making the college football playoff. Now, I think SMU is going to be pretty good once again. I don't think they'll be quite as good as they were last year, but I still think they're going to be one of the better teams in the conference. Quarterback Kevin Jennings is a big reason why SMU was so good offensively last season. He's back for another year, and I think he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. Now, outside of Kevin Jennings, SMU did lose some pretty significant production on the offensive side of the ball, as they lost their top 2 running backs and their top 2 receivers. But they brought in UCLA transfer TJ Harden at running back, and at receiver they brought in James Madison transfer Ymir Knight. So while I do think the downgrade at the skill positions, I still think they'll be pretty solid. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, SMU only returns 2 starters, so I definitely expect their defense to take a step back. But SMU is a team that is going to be pretty good. I don't think they're going to win 11 games like they did last year, and I don't think they're going to make the college football playoff, but I do think they're still going to be a pretty good team. I've got them going 9-3 overall, 6-2 in the conference, with their losses coming against Baylor, Clemson, and Louisville. 3rd in the ACC, I've got Pitt. So it might be a little surprising to see Pitt this high up in the conference, but I really like this Pitt team. They're coming off a really interesting year last year. They started the year 7-0, just to finish 7-6. But they were pretty solid last year, and I think they're going to be even better this season. Quarterback Eli Holstein was great for Pitt last year before he got hurt, and that was also a big reason they really struggled in the second half. But he's back, and if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. And running back Desmond Reed is also great, as last year he had almost 1,000 rushing yards, plus he had over 500 receiving yards. And he's one of the best dual threat backs in the country. Then at the receiver position, Kenny Johnson and Raphael Williams Jr. were both key contributors last year with roughly 500 yards each, and I think they'll be even better this year. Now, the defense is always pretty good for Pitt, and they should be pretty good once again. They've got a good linebacker duo of Rasheem Biles and Kyle Lewis, and overall this defense should be pretty good. But this is a Pitt team I like a lot, especially offensively. I really like what they have. I think Eli Holstein's going to take that next step. Desmond Reed is already great, and this is a Pitt team that is going to be quite good. But I've got Pitt going 9-3 overall, 6-2 in conference play. I've got them losing to Florida State, Notre Dame, and Miami. 2nd in the ACC, I've got Miami. So Miami, they were great last year, although a late season collapse prevented them from making the college football playoff. Now, I do think Miami will be pretty good once again, although it will be hard to be equally as good because they did lose a ton of production from last year's team. Obviously, Cam Ward was the number 1 overall pick, but they also lost running back Damian Martinez as well as their top 4 pass catchers. But they brought in Carson Beck at quarterback, and running back should be pretty solid with the duo of Mark Fletcher and Jordan Weil, as those two combined for 1,000 yards last year. Now, the receiver position is definitely weaker than last year, but transfers CJ Daniels and Keelan Marion should definitely help. Now, the defense last year for Miami was not very good, and they were pretty inconsistent, but they brought in a new defensive coordinator and several transfers to try to help the defense, and I think they should be pretty solid. But this is a Miami team that's going to be pretty good. They're not going to be as good as they were last year, at least I don't think. But I think a lot of this season for Miami depends on Carson Beck. If you get the 2023 version of Carson Beck, who was very good, you're probably going to win 11 games. But if you get last year's version where he threw a ton of interceptions, you might only win 7 or 8 games. But I do think this Miami team is going to be pretty good. I think they'll be good but not great, but I've got them going 9-3 overall, 7-1 in ACC play, losing to Notre Dame, Florida, and SMU. And finishing number 1 in the ACC, I've got Clemson. So this is a Clemson team that is really good. I really like quarterback Cade Klubnik, and I think he's the best returning quarterback in college football, plus he has a ton of talent around him. As his top 3 receivers from last season all return, including Antonio Williams, who had 11 touchdowns last season. Now, the running back spot for Clemson is a little bit of an unknown, with Phil Maffa no longer on the team, but the talent is definitely there for him to be replaced without a drop-off. Now, on the defensive side of things, Clemson, they should be really good. They hired Tom Allen away from Penn State as their defensive coordinator, and they have stars all around this defense, led by defensive linemen T.J. Parker and Peter Woods. But this is a really good Clemson team. They're elite on offense, elite on defense, and I think they're one of the best teams in the country. But I've got Clemson going 11-1 overall, 8-0 in ACC play, with their one loss coming the final week of the regular season at South Carolina. And then in the ACC championship game, we've got Miami and Clemson, and I've got Clemson. I think Clemson is the best team in the ACC by quite a bit, and I think they should beat Miami fairly convincingly in the conference title game. But overall, when looking at the ACC this year, last year was a down year for the conference, but I think the ACC is going to be quite good this year. I really like a lot of the teams they've got, and I have 7 teams winning at least 8 games. Next conference we're going to go through is the Big Ten. Starting off last in the Big Ten is not really a surprise, it's Purdue. And they're in a really tough spot. They had a terrible year last year, going just 1-11 and firing head coach Ryan Walters. They hired Barry Odom away from UNLV, and he does have a very good track record of turning programs around, but I find it highly unlikely that Purdue is going to be anywhere close to good this season. But, I mean, this is the Purdue team. They're just not very good. They've got a few good players. One of those is running back Devin Mockabee, who I do think should be the focal point of the offense, but outside of him, the offense is pretty bad. North Carolina transfer Ryan Brownie won a 4-way quarterback battle, but he's pretty unproven, and there's not much weapons around him outside of Mockabee. Then defensively for Purdue, they returned 0 starters from last year's team. But given how bad they were, that might not be a bad thing. But I do think Purdue will be slightly better than they were last year, although that's not a very high bar. But I've got Purdue going 2-10, 0-9 in conference play. I've got them beating Southern Illinois and Ball State. 17th in the Big Ten, I've got Maryland. So Maryland, they had a rough year last year, going 4-8, and I don't see them being much better. Starting on the offensive side of the ball, they have not named a starting quarterback yet, and currently have a 3-way battle ongoing between 4-star true freshman Malik Washington, UCLA transfer Justin Martin, and Christian Martin. Now, the potential is there at the quarterback spot for Maryland, especially if they end up starting Malik Washington, but the problem any of their 3 quarterbacks is going to run into is the rest of the offense is pretty bad. The offensive line is not very good, and they lost their leading rusher and their top 3 receivers from last season. They do have sophomore running back Nolan Ray, who averaged 5 yards per carry last season. Outside of that, the offense is pretty bad. Defensively for Maryland, they're also not great. They returned just 1 starter from last year's defense, and they're not very good. But overall for Maryland, this is a team that's got potential. I like what Malik Washington can do, and I do think we'll end up starting sooner rather than later. But Maryland overall, they've got a lot of young talent, but I don't think it's going to translate to success this season. I've got Maryland 17th in the Big Ten, finishing 3-9, winless in conference play, wins against FAU, Northern Illinois, and Townsend. 16th in the Big Ten, I've got Northwestern. So Northwestern, after a surprising year in 2023, they took a big step back last year, going just 4-8. But offensively for Northwestern, they made a big move, bringing in SMU transfer quarterback Preston Stone, and I think he's going to be a big part of this offense. Northwestern, they also return their leading rusher from last season in Cam Porter, and at receiver they added South Carolina State transfer Griffin Wilde, and he was one of the best players at the FCS level last season. Now, the defense for Northwestern is not great. They've got a lot of new faces, and I don't expect them to be that good. I don't expect Northwestern to be that good as a team. I think they could be solid on offense, but I think the defense is going to hold this team back. I've got them going 3-9 overall, 1-8 in conference play, with them beating Western Illinois, UL Monroe, and Purdue. 15th in the Big Ten, I've got Michigan State. So Michigan State, they're at 15 in the Big Ten, and they enter year 2 under head coach Jonathan Smith after they went 5-7 in year 1. Offensively, I think this Michigan State team is okay. They're led by second-year quarterback Aiden Childs, who was decent last year, but if he takes a step forward, that can definitely be big for this offense. But outside of Childs, there's definitely some playmakers. Nick Marsh is back after he led the team in receiving yards last season, and tight end Jack Velling is one of the better tight ends in college football. Then at the running back spot, they brought in Elijah Tolliver, who ran for 958 yards last year with Sacramento State. Then the defense for Michigan State should actually be pretty solid. They were decent last year and returned some key players, so I think they should be pretty good. But this is a Michigan State team with a lot of potential. I think a lot relies on what the offense can do, because I think this defense is pretty good. But if Aiden Childs takes a step forward, this is a Michigan State team that will very likely make a bowl game. But I'm just not the biggest fan of Aiden Childs. I don't think he's great. And I think this Michigan State team will be okay. I've got them going 5-7 again, 2-7 in conference play. I've got them beating Western Michigan, Youngstown State, Boston College, UCLA, and Maryland. Finishing 14th in the Big Ten, I've got UCLA. So UCLA is an interesting team. They went 5-7 last year in year 1 under Deshaun Foster, but they ended the season on a very strong note, winning 4 of their last 6 games, and maybe they can carry that into this season. The big thing for UCLA this offseason, they brought in quarterback Nico Iamaleava, and he should make a big impact on the offensive side of the ball. He wasn't elite last year at Tennessee, but he was still pretty good, and it's definitely an upgrade at the quarterback position. Now, a question for UCLA is, who's he going to throw the ball to? Because they didn't really bring in any transfers at the receiver position, and they also lost their top 3 receivers from last season. Now, I do think the run game should be pretty good for UCLA, as they brought in Cal running back Javion Thomas. And the defensively for UCLA, they're okay. They've got some talent, and I think they should be pretty solid. But UCLA is an interesting team. They've got a lot of potential, especially now that they've got a good quarterback. But I don't think they're going to be anything too crazy. I've got them going 5-7 overall, 3-6 in the conference. Wins over UNLV, New Mexico, Northwestern, Maryland, and Nebraska. Finishing 13th in the Big Ten, I've got Minnesota. So Minnesota, they had a pretty solid year last year, going 8-5, although I don't think they'll be quite as good as they were last season. They lost their starting quarterback Max Brosmer, and because of that, the passing game becomes a little bit of a question. They have redshirt freshman Drake Lindsey ready to take over as their starting quarterback, but receiver is also a question after losing their top 2 receivers. But while the pass game is a little bit of a concern, I think this run game for Minnesota is going to be very good. Darius Taylor is one of the better backs in the Big Ten, plus they brought in Marshall transfer A.J. Turner, who ran for 864 yards last year on 8.3 yards per carry. So with the duo of Darius Taylor and A.J. Turner, I think that should give Minnesota a very strong ground game. Now, the defense last year for Minnesota was pretty good, and I think they should be solid once again with 5 returning starters. Now, this is a Minnesota team with a lot of potential. I think it really depends on how good their pass game is, although I definitely have my concerns about it. But I think Minnesota is going to be your classic old-school Big Ten team. They're going to have a very good run game, a good defense, and I think they're going to be okay. I've got them finishing 5-7 overall, 3-6 in conference play. Wins over Buffalo, Northwestern State, Purdue, Michigan State, and Northwestern. Finishing 12th in the Big Ten, I've got Wisconsin. And this is a big year for Wisconsin head coach Luke Fickell. Because Luke Fickell was thought to be a great hire back when they hired him a few years ago, but he now enters year 3 at Wisconsin, and he has a combined record of 13-13. So if Luke Fickell has another disappointing season, I would not be shocked to see him fired. But the Wisconsin offense needs to be a lot better than they were last year, and I think they should show some improvement. They brought in Maryland quarterback Billy Edwards Jr., and I think he should be pretty solid, plus he's got a solid group of receivers led by Vinny Anthony. Now at the running back spot, the guys are pretty unproven for Wisconsin, but the talent is definitely there for them to have a good run game. Then on the defensive side of the ball, Wisconsin should be pretty good. Their secondary is great, and their front 7 has a lot of potential. But while Wisconsin needs to have a good year to keep Luke Fickell around, I just don't see it happening, especially with how hard their schedule is. But I've got Wisconsin going 5-7 overall, 3-6 in the conference. I've got them beating Miami, Ohio, Middle Tennessee, Maryland, Iowa, and Minnesota. 11th in the Big Ten, I've got Rutgers. So Rutgers was another team that was pretty solid last year, winning 7 games, and they're actually going off back-to-back winning seasons. Now, I do think getting to a winning record this year is going to be a lot harder for Rutgers, considering their schedule is much harder. But I still think their team is pretty solid. On the offensive side of things, quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis is back, and he was pretty good last year, plus his top 2 receivers, Ian Strong and KJ Duff, both return. Now, a player who doesn't return is star running back Kyle Monangai, and he was a huge part of their offense last season, so I could see the run game taking a slight step back. But I do think Rutgers did a pretty good job of trying to replace Monangai, as they have a pretty good duo of Antoine Raymond and FAU transfer CJ Campbell. And together those two combined for 1,300 yards and 19 touchdowns last season. So I still think this run game will be pretty good. Now, the defense for Rutgers is a little bit of a question. They were good last year, but returned just 2 starters. They made a lot of moves in the transfer portal, so I do think they'll be okay, although I do think it'll be a slight step back from where they were last season. But overall, this is a Rutgers team that is pretty good. I like what they have offensively, and I think they should be pretty solid. But as I said before, the schedule is pretty tough, so I don't see Rutgers going 8-4 or even 9-3. I've got them going 6-6, 3-6 in Big Ten play, with wins over Ohio, Miami, Ohio, Norfolk State, Minnesota, Purdue, and Maryland. 10th in the Big Ten, I've got USC. They're another interesting one. They had a pretty disappointing year last year, going 7-6, and they need to be better this season. And this is also a big year for Lincoln Riley, because he went 11-3 in year 1 at USC, but since then he has been 15-11. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be fired, but if USC has another mediocre season, it's definitely possible. But USC is led by quarterback Jaden Mayava, who started the final 4 games for USC, and he was okay, but definitely showed a lot of potential. So maybe he can carry that into this season. Now, around Mayava, he's got some pretty solid targets, as Nakai Lemon and Jacoby Wayne are both back. Now, at the running back spot, USC did lose their top 2 backs, but they brought in New Mexico transfer Eli Sanders, who had over 1,000 yards last season. Then the defense for USC showed a lot of improvement from 2023 to 2024, and I could see them continuing to improve, although they did lose quite a bit of experience. But I think this is a USC team that is going to be okay. I don't think they're going to be anything too great. I think they'll be similar to last year, and I've got them going 7-5, 5-4 in the conference, with their losses coming to Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, Iowa, and Oregon. 9th in the Big Ten, I've got Indiana. So it might be a little shocking to see a team who made the playoff last year this low in the conference, but I think Indiana is going to take a step back. They lost quarterback Curtis Rourke and replaced him with Cal transfer Fernando Mendoza, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but is definitely decent. But around the quarterback spot, they added Maryland transfer running back Roman Hemby, as well as App State transfer receiver Mekhi Jackson. And on top of Jackson, who transferred in, Indiana also returns one of the best receivers in the country in Elijah Surratt. Now, the defense for Indiana was great last year and should be quite good once again, although maybe not quite as good. But this is an Indiana team. I do think they'll have some success, but I don't expect to see them in the playoff picture like last season. But I've got Indiana going 8-4, 5-4 in conference play. I've got them losing to Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, and Illinois. Finishing 8th in the Big Ten, I've got Iowa. So Iowa always seems to be pretty solid. They went 8-5 last year, and they've actually had a winning record each of the last 12 years. And I think that should be the case once again. Last season, the Iowa offense was actually kind of decent, and I think they'll be pretty respectable once again. They brought in South Dakota State transfer Mark Gronowski at quarterback, and he's been one of the best players at the FCS level over the past couple seasons. So I think we'll be able to transfer most of that success to the FBS level. Now, Iowa lost star running back Caleb Johnson, so I do expect their run game to take a slight step back, but they definitely still have some talent at the running back position. Now, receiver is a bit of a question for Iowa, but their leading receiver from last season in Jacob Gill does return. Then on the defensive side of the ball, Iowa only returns 4 starters, but this Iowa defense is always so good, I don't really think it matters who's out there, so I still think this defense is going to be good. They might not be elite, but they're still going to be very good. But this is an Iowa team that I think should be pretty solid. I like the addition of Mark Gronowski at quarterback, and I think he should make their pass game better, plus his run game is pretty solid. And their defense is also one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. Now, the schedule is not the easiest, so I don't think they're going to go win 8-9 games. Instead, I've got them going 7-5, 5-4 in conference play, with their losses to Iowa State, Wisconsin, Penn State, Oregon, and Nebraska. 7th in the Big Ten, I've got Washington. So Washington took a step back last season, but that was expected considering the amount of production they lost from their 2023 team that went to the national championship game. But Washington, they were still decent last year, going 6-7, and I think they should be much better this season. I really like what they have offensively, and they're led by quarterback Desmond Williams Jr., and he was great last year in his limited action as a true freshman. And I'm really excited to see what he can do now as the full-time starter. Washington, they've also got a lot of talent around their young quarterback, as running back Jonah Coleman is back after he ran for 1,000 yards last year, and receiver Denzel Boston is also back, plus they brought in Penn State transfer Amari Evans. Then on the defensive side of the ball, they hired Ryan Walters as their defensive coordinator, and while he wasn't great as the Purdue head coach, he is a very good defensive coordinator, plus there's some talent on this Washington defense. But I really like this Washington team, especially what they have offensively. A lot rests on the shoulders of Desmond Williams Jr. and their young quarterback, but I do think he's going to be pretty good, and because of that, I think Washington as a team is going to be quite good. I've got them going 9-3 overall, 6-3 in conference play. I've got them losing to Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon. 6th in the conference, I've got Nebraska. So Nebraska is a team with some pretty high expectations entering this season. Matt Rhule enters his 3rd year as Nebraska's head coach, and historically he has had a lot of success in year 3. In his 3rd year at Temple, they won 10 games, and in his 3rd year at Baylor, he won 11 games. So we'll definitely have to see if that trend can continue for Matt Rhule. But he definitely has Nebraska headed in the right direction. They're coming off their first winning season since 2016, and I think they should be better than they were last year. Their offense was very young last year, and they're still on the younger side, but they're more experienced and should be pretty good. They've got Dylan Raiola back at quarterback, and he should only improve after he was pretty solid last year as a freshman. Running back Emmett Johnson is also back after running for 600 yards last season. And at receiver, they've got sophomore Ja'Cory Barney, as well as Kentucky transfer Dane Key. And then the offensive line should also be pretty good for Nebraska. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, Nebraska, they only returned 4 starters, but the good news is all 4 of those starters are in the secondary, so they should be pretty good. But outside of the secondary, Nebraska, they brought in a lot of transfers to help the front 7, so I don't think they'll be terrible. But I like this Nebraska team, especially offensively, now that they're more experienced. And I don't think Nebraska will win 10-plus games like Matt Rhule has in his 3rd year at his other stops. But I definitely think it's possible. They've got a pretty favorable schedule, and I've got them having their best season since 2016, going 9-3, 6-3 in conference play, with losses to USC, UCLA, and Penn State. 5th in the Big Ten, I've got Michigan. So Michigan is a very interesting team. Last year in their first 10 games, they were not good, going 5-5, but then they won 3 straight to end the year, including upset wins over Ohio State and Alabama. So there's definitely a chance they can carry that momentum and into this season. Now, offensively for Michigan, we don't know who their starting quarterback will be because Sharon Moore does not want to name a starter, but it's probably going to be 5-star freshman Bryce Underwood, at least sooner rather than later. But whoever the quarterback is for Michigan is going to need some receivers to step up, because last year Michigan did not have a single receiver who had more than 250 receiving yards. Now, the run game should be strong for Michigan like it always is, as they've got a good duo in the backfield with UMass transfer CJ Hester and Alabama transfer Justice Haynes. Now, the defense for Michigan is pretty interesting because they lost some major players to the NFL, especially along the defensive line. But I still think this Michigan defense should be pretty solid. I'm not super high on Michigan, but I do think they'll be a pretty good team. I've got them finishing 5th in the Big Ten with a 9-3 record, 7-2 in conference play. I've got them losing to Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Ohio State. Yes, I do think Ohio State finally beats Michigan. 4th in the Big Ten, I've got Illinois. So Illinois, they had a great year last year, winning 10 games, and they should be pretty good once again, as they returned pretty much everyone from last year's team. Quarterback Luke Altmaier is set to start his 3rd year for Illinois. Running back Aiden Walker is back after having a solid year last year with 600 yards, plus the offensive line returns all 5 starters. The only real question for this Illinois offense is the receiver spot after they lost their top 2 targets from last year, but they added West Virginia transfer Hudson Clement, who had 750 yards last season. Now, defensively for Illinois, they should also be pretty good. This is a team with a great defensive line and an elite secondary. But this is an Illinois team with a chance to be really good. It sounds weird to have Illinois in the playoff conversation, but they're definitely good enough. They don't have the hardest schedule either, and I've got them going 10-2. I've got them winning 10 games for the 2nd straight year, 10-2 overall, 7-2 in the conference. Their losses come against Ohio State and Washington. 3rd in the Big Ten, I've got Oregon. So Oregon is the 3rd best team in the Big Ten this year. They had a great year last year as their first year as a member of the conference, actually winning the Big Ten. And I don't think they'll be winning the conference, but I still think they'll be one of the best teams. They lost quarterback Dylan Gabriel, but Dante Moore is supposed to be the next great Oregon quarterback, and he has a ton of potential. And next to Dante Moore in the backfield is a great running back duo of Tulane transfer Mekhi Hughes, as well as Noah Winnington. Now, the receiver position is a little bit of a question, needing to replace their top 3 targets from last year. And Oregon doesn't really have a ton of experience at the receiver position, but they brought in Florida State transfer Malik Benson, plus they've got a lot of talented young guys, including freshmen to carry on more. But the talent is definitely there for Oregon at the receiver position, so I'm not too worried about it. Another question for this Oregon offense is the offensive line, as they lost 4 of their 5 starters from last season. Now, they did bring in a lot of transfers along the offensive line, although it is still going to be hard to match what they were last year, because they were pretty good. Now, defensively, for Oregon, they lost some key pieces, but I still really like what they have. Their front 7 is great, led by Mateo Uyunglele, and their secondary is pretty inexperienced, but they're still very talented. But this is an Oregon team. I definitely think they might take a slight step back from last season, but they don't have the hardest schedule, and I've got them going 11-1 overall, 8-1 in the conference, with their one loss coming at Penn State. Speaking of Penn State, I've got them finishing second in the Big Ten. Penn State, they're a team with a lot of hype and expectations entering this season, and it's very easy to see why. They made the semifinals of the college football playoff last season, and they return almost everyone. Quarterback Drew Allar is back, and I've been very critical of him, although I do think he's one of the better returning quarterbacks in college football. Then outside of Drew Allar, you have arguably the best running back duo in the country with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and the offensive line is great. Pass catchers are a bit of a question with Tyler Warren now in the NFL, and the receivers last year were already not very good, but they did bring in some solid transfers at the receiver position, such as Trevor Pena from Syracuse and Devontae Ross from Troy. And together, those two combined for nearly 2,000 yards last season. Then on the defensive side of the ball for Penn State, they lost Abdul Carter, which is definitely going to hurt. Plus, they lost their defensive coordinator in Tom Allen, but they hired Jim Knowles away from Ohio State. They have a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and their defense is still going to be very good. But this is a Penn State team that is extremely good. It's easy to see why they've got high expectations entering this season, and I think this season depends on two things for Penn State. The first is quarterback Drew Allar, and can he take that next step and finally become an elite quarterback? Because this is now his 3rd year as a starter, and all we're still talking about is the potential and can he put it all together. In Penn State, if they're going to win a national championship, they're going to need Drew Allar to do that. And the second thing this season depends on for Penn State is, can James Franklin finally win a big game? And if he can, Penn State can definitely win a national championship. But this is a Penn State team. I think they're one of the best teams in the country. I've got them finishing the regular season with an 11-1 record, 8-1 in Big Ten play. Their only loss coming at Ohio State. And finishing first in the Big Ten, it's Ohio State. So Ohio State, they're supposed to be really good once again. They're obviously the defending national champions, and they did lose some key players from last year's team, but they also return a ton of key players. Quarterback Julian Sayin is supposed to be the next great Ohio State quarterback, and he's also got a ton of talent around him. Jeremiah Smith is probably the best player in the country, plus they've got Carnell Tate, who's one of the more underrated receivers in the nation. Now, the running back spot is a little bit of an unknown, as they lost both Quishon Judkins and Travion Henderson to the NFL, but they added West Virginia transfer C.J. Donaldson, plus they've got talented sophomore James Peoples. Now, switching to the defensive side of the ball, it's very similar to the offensive side. They lost key players like edge rushers Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, but they've still got some of the best defensive players in the country, like Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles. But this is an Ohio State team. They've got some new starters, but they should still be equally as good because they definitely don't lack talent. But Ohio State, they're still going to be one of the best teams in the country. I've got them going 12-0 in the regular season. It's definitely possible they go 11-1 because I have no idea which way that Texas game is going to go in Week 1. But I've got Ohio State 12-0, 8-0 in the Big Ten. And I've got Ohio State finishing first in the regular season. And then in the Big Ten championship game, we've got Penn State and Ohio State. And I've got Ohio State winning this game in the regular season. Now, it's hard to beat a good team twice, but it might be even harder for James Franklin to win a big game. And for that reason, I've got Ohio State. Moving on to the Big 12, finishing last, or 16th in the Big 12, I've got UCF. So UCF is in a pretty rough spot. They went 4-8 last year, and they've got a new head coach in Scott Frost after Gus Malzahn left to become the Florida State offensive coordinator. But Scott Frost, he was the UCF head coach back in 2017 when they went 13-0, so maybe he can help them become good again. But he's named Cam Fancher their starting quarterback, and he could be good, but he has not been good so far in his college career, as he's thrown 27 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. So it definitely seems like the quarterback spot might be a weakness. UCF also needs to replace star running back from last season in RJ Harvey, as well as their top 3 receivers from last season. So this offense looks really rough. Now, the defense doesn't look a whole ton better. They returned just 3 starters, and I don't think they're going to be that good. Overall, for UCF, I do not have high expectations for them in year one under Scott Frost, and I think they're going to be pretty bad. I've got them going 3-9 overall, 1-8 in the Big 12. Their only wins coming against Jacksonville State, North Carolina A&T, and Oklahoma State. 15th in the Big 12, I've got West Virginia. So West Virginia had a fairly disappointing season last year, going 6-7, and they fired head coach Neil Brown. Now, they hired their former coach in Rich Rodriguez, who was their coach from 2001 to 2007. And during that time, West Virginia was actually pretty good, as they combined a record of 60-26. But I don't see West Virginia having a ton of success in year one. They have an ongoing quarterback battle between Jalen Henderson and Nico Marcial, but similarly to UCF, I really don't think either player will be that good. The weapons around the quarterback for West Virginia also aren't great, with 4 of their 5 pass catchers from last season being no longer with the team. The good news is running back Jaheim White is back after a good year last year, but he's about the only positive thing on the offensive side of the ball. Now, the defense for West Virginia last year was terrible. They don't return much production, which could be a good thing, but they brought in a lot of transfers, and that might help. But overall, I don't think West Virginia is very good. I've got them going 3-9, 1-8 in conference play. Wins over Robert Morris, Ohio, and UCF. 14th in the Big 12, I've got Oklahoma State. So they were terrible last year, going 3-9, which was their worst year since 2000. And that was a really surprisingly bad year for Oklahoma State because they had a lot of talent on their team. They just didn't play like it. And I don't have high expectations for them this year because a lot of that talent that was on their team is no longer there. Offensively for Oklahoma State, they replaced, I'm pretty sure, every starter. They got a new quarterback, new receivers, a new running back, and 5 new starters along the offensive line. So I really don't have high expectations for this offense. Now, defensively, they could be a little better than they were last year with a lot of transfers, but I just don't think this Oklahoma State team is that good. It's weird picking them to finish this low in the Big 12 because Mike Gundy's a great coach, and it's weird to see his team be that bad, but I don't think this team is good at all, and I've got them going 3-9 for the second straight season. I've got them beating UT Martin, Tulsa, and Houston. Finishing 13th in the Big 12, I've got Cincinnati. So Cincinnati showed some improvement last year, going from 3-9 to 5-7, and I definitely think there's a chance they continue to improve. Quarterback Brandon Sorsby was pretty solid last year in his first year as a starter, and I think he could show some improvement from last year to this year, as he's the starter once again. Now, the playmakers around Brandon Sorsby are questionable, as they lost their top 2 running backs and their top 4 receivers from last season. So that is definitely a question, although luckily for them, tight end Joe Royer is one of the better tight ends in the Big 12. Then on the defensive side of the ball, Cincinnati showed some slight improvement last year, and I think that will be the case once again. I think they'll be slightly better on the defensive side of things, but nothing too crazy. But Cincinnati's a team that I think they'll be decent. I don't think they'll be great. I think the offense has potential because Sorsby pretty solid, but he just doesn't have much talent around him. So I've got Cincinnati going 4-8, 2-7 in the Big 12, with their wins coming against Bowling Green, Northwestern State, UCF, and Oklahoma State, sorry. 12th in the Big 12, I've got Arizona. So Arizona was really disappointing last year, going from a preseason top 25 team to 4-8. And I don't think this year is going to be much better. At the quarterback spot, Noah Fifita returns for another season, but he had a major sophomore slump last year, plus his top target and former high school teammate Tedero McMillan is now in the NFL. And there's really not another great receiver on this roster. Their best returning receiver is Chris Hunter, who had 300 yards last year. And Arizona, they also lost their leading rusher. But this is an offense with a quarterback that has potential, and we've seen him play at a high level when he was a freshman, but he hasn't been good since then, and I don't think this offense is going to be that good. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, Arizona struggled last year. They made some big changes, and I think they'll be a little bit better. But overall, this is an Arizona team that I don't think is going to be that good. I've got them missing a bowl game. I'm going 5-7, 3-6 in conference play, with their wins coming against Hawaii, Weber State, however you want to say it, Oklahoma State, BYU, and Cincinnati. 11th, I've got Houston. So Houston was not great in 2024 in year 1 under Willie Fritz, but I think they should be better this season. Their offense was one of the worst offenses in the country last year, but they made some nice changes, and that starts at the quarterback position, bringing former 5-star quarterback in Connor Wegman. And while he wasn't great at Texas A&M, he has the talent, and I definitely think a fresh start could be good for Connor Wegman, and I definitely think it's going to be good for this Houston offense. Now, the run game for Houston should be pretty solid, as last year's leading rusher Rashawn Stanford is back. Plus, they brought in Rice transfer Dean Connors, who ran for 780 yards last season. Now, the offensive line could hold back what is a fairly talented offense, because they were terrible last year, but they did bring in some transfers, which should help. Now, defensively, Houston was good last year, but they lost their defensive coordinator and a few key players, but I still think this defense will be pretty solid. But I kind of like this Houston team. I don't think they're going to be elite, but I think Connor Wegman's definitely going to help them offensively. And because of that, I've got Houston making a bowl game at 6-6. I've got them going 3-6 in the conference. And I've got them beating Stephen F. Austin, Rice, Oregon State, Arizona, West Virginia, and UCF. 10th in the Big 12, I've got BYU. So BYU is another really interesting team entering this season. And they were one of the most surprising teams of last season, finishing 11-2. But I don't think they'll be quite as good this season. Quarterback Jake Retzlaff transferred, and that is definitely a big loss to their offense. And replacing him will be true freshman quarterback Bear Bachmeier. And it's actually going to be the first time in BYU history a true freshman quarterback is their starter. But Bachmeier has a lot of potential, and he's also got some talent around him on this BYU offense. As running back LJ Martin is back, as is last year's leading receiver Chase Roberts. Now, they did lose 3 starters along the offensive line, but I still think this BYU offense should be pretty good. But obviously a lot rests on the shoulders of Bear Bachmeier. Now, defensively, BYU was great last year, but I do think they'll take a step back there as they return just 3 starters. But this is a BYU team that I like, but I don't think they're going to be great like they were last year and win 10+ games. But instead, I've got them finishing 7-5, 4-5 in conference play, with their losses coming against Colorado, Arizona, Iowa State, Texas Tech, and TCU. 9th in the Big 12, I've got Colorado. So Colorado had a good year last year in year 2 under Deion Sanders, as they went 9-4, but I don't expect them to be as good this season. They lost Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, as well as a bunch of other key contributors. Now, I do think Colorado did a solid job trying to replace everybody, I just don't think they're going to be as good. At the quarterback spot, they have not named a starter and currently have a battle ongoing between Liberty transfer Caden Salter, as well as talented true freshman Julian Lewis. The running back and receiver spot is a question, as last year they did not run the ball at all, and when they did, they were not good at it. Although I do think that's partly because they wanted to throw the ball with how good their pass game was, but that definitely was a major question heading into this season. Then the receiver spot is also a question, with their top 4 receivers from last season being no longer on the team. But they brought in Sincere Brown and Joseph Williams, and I definitely think that will help, as last year those two combined for 1,600 yards and 17 scores. Now, last year's defense was pretty good for Colorado, but they lost key contributors. They were very active in the transfer portal, but I do think it will be a slight step back on the defensive side of the ball. But Colorado is a very interesting team entering this season. I'm very interested to see what a Deion Sanders coach team looks like when he doesn't have Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. I still think Colorado will be a solid team, not quite Big 12 contenders like they were last year, but I've got them going 6-6 overall, 4-5 in conference play. I've got them beating Delaware, Houston, Wyoming, BYU, Arizona, and West Virginia. Finishing 8th in the Big 12, I've got TCU. So TCU is an interesting team entering this year. They went 9-4 last year, and I think they should be pretty solid once again. On the offensive side of the ball, quarterback Josh Hoover is back after he was 2nd in the Big 12 in passing yards. But TCU, they did lose 3 of their top 4 receivers. But Eric McAllister is back, and he should be the top target for this TCU offense. Now, running the ball last season was a struggle, and I think it could be a struggle once again, as they lost their top running back, and I just don't see this run game being anything too crazy. Now, defensively for TCU, they were solid last year, and they bring back 6 starters, including safety Bud Clark. But this is a TCU team that is very solid entering this year. I don't think they're going to be an amazing team, but I think they're going to be very solid. I've got them going 7-5 overall, 6-3 in the conference, with their losses coming against North Carolina, SMU, Arizona State, Baylor, and Kansas State. 7th in the Big 12, I've got Kansas. So this is a Kansas team that I had really high hopes for last season, and I had them winning 10 games. Now, obviously that didn't happen as they got off to a terrible start, but they ended the season on a good note, winning 4 of their last 6 games, and I think they can carry that over into this season. A big part of their late season turnaround last year was quarterback Jalen Daniels, and he's back for his final season at Kansas, and they do need him to be a little bit more consistent and cut down on the turnovers, But if he can do that, he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12. Now, outside of Jalen Daniels, Kansas will start running back Devin Neal, but I think backup running back Daniel Highshaw is ready for an increased role. Then at receiver, they also lost some key contributors, but they brought in Alabama transfer Emmanuel Henderson, who's a former 4-star recruit, and should be one of the top targets for Jalen Daniels. Now, the offensive line and defense are both questions, as the offensive line returns just 2 starters, and the defense returns just 3 starters. But this is a Kansas team that I think is pretty good. I do think last year's Kansas team was better on paper, but I still think Kansas will be solid this year. I've got them going 8-4 overall, 6-3 in conference play, with their losses coming to Missouri, Texas Tech, Kansas State, and Iowa State. 6th in the Big 12, I've got Texas Tech. So Texas Tech is a team with really high expectations entering this season, and I've even seen some people say they're going to make the college football playoff. Now, I don't think that is going to happen, but I do think Texas Tech is going to be good, and I do understand why they have a lot of expectations. Quarterback Baron Morton is back after he had a good year last year, and he's got some good targets like Caleb Douglas and Coy Eakin, and both those guys had over 650 yards and 6 touchdowns last season. Now, I do think the run game will take a step back for Texas Tech, as running back Taj Brooks is now in the NFL, and he had over 1,500 yards last season. Plus, his replacement was supposed to be USC transfer Quentin Joyner, although he unfortunately tore his ACL in training camp. Now, they do have sophomore Jacoby Williams, but they're going to need to rely on him quite a bit. The offensive line also should be a lot better than it was last year for Texas Tech, as they brought in 4 transfers. Now, defensively, Texas Tech was not good last year. They ranked 122nd in scoring defense. But they brought in some huge transfers and big-time players, such as Stanford edge rusher David Bailey and UCF defensive tackle Lee Hunter. But this is a Texas Tech team that definitely has the potential to contend for the Big 12 title if everything goes their way. But I have them going 9-3, 6-3 in conference play, losses at Utah, Arizona State, and Kansas State. Finishing at number 5 in the Big 12, I've got Utah. So Utah, they had a down year for their recent standards last year, going just 5-7, but I think they're going to have a big bounce back season. Their offense was a big reason why they were so bad last season, but they made some big changes to the offensive side of the ball that I really think are going to help. They started by hiring New Mexico offensive coordinator Jason Beck, and by hiring him, they were also able to get New Mexico quarterback Devin Dampier, and he is an elite rushing threat. He ran for over 1,100 yards last season and 19 touchdowns. Now, as a passer, there's definitely room for improvement, as he threw 12 touchdowns to 12 picks last year, but with what he can do as a runner, gives him one of the highest ceilings in the entire country. Now, outside of Dampier, the playmakers on the offensive side of the ball are a question, as Utah lost their leading rusher and their top 3 receivers from last season. Although, with how good their offensive line is supposed to be, I don't think running the ball is going to be a question. Then defensively for Utah, they're pretty much always good. I think that's going to be the case once again. This defense is going to be very good. They've got a lot of returning starters. And I think Utah has a ton of potential. They can definitely make the college football playoff. They have potential to win the Big 12. I think a lot of it depends on what Devin Dampier can do as a passer. I think he's going to be solid, but nothing crazy. And I've got Utah overall having a pretty good year, going 9-3, 6-3 in the Big 12, with their losses coming to Arizona State, BYU, and Kansas. Finishing number 4 in the Big 12, I've got Baylor. So Baylor is another team that I think has Big 12 title potential this season. And they got off to a slow start last year, but they ended up finishing the year really strong and winning 8 games. But quarterback Sawyer Robertson is back after a very solid second half of the season last year, and overall he threw 28 touchdowns. And running back Bryson Washington is arguably the best running back in the conference. Plus, Baylor also returns their top 2 receivers from last year in Josh Cameron and Ashton Hawkins. And the offensive line should be very good with 4 returning starters. So on paper, this Baylor offense looks really good. Then defensively, I think they're going to be quite good as well. They bring back 5 starters from a defense that was very good last year. And like I said before, I really like this Baylor team. I think they have the potential to win the Big 12 championship. I don't think they'll do it, but I do think they'll win 10 games. And I have them going 10-2, 7-2 in conference play, with their losses coming to Arizona State and Utah. Third in the Big 12, I've got Iowa State. So Iowa State is coming off a Big 12 title game appearance last year, and they should be right back in the Big 12 championship picture again this season. They brought back quarterback Rocco Becht, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12, Plus, they have what is probably the best running back duo in the Big 12, with Abu Sama and Carson Hansen. And last year, both those players combined for about 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns. Now, the receiver position for the Cyclones is a little bit of a question after they lost both their 1,000-yard receivers from last season, although I do like ECU transfer Chase Sowell. He had a big year last year, and he should be able to step into that number one wide receiver role for Iowa State. Now, defensively for Iowa State, they were very good last year, except against the run, but overall, I do think this defense will be pretty good. I do slightly worry about their run defense, considering how bad they were last year, but I do think it will be better. But overall, for Iowa State, if everything goes right, they're going to be in the Big 12 championship game. They got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and I think this is a very good Iowa State team. I've got them finishing third in the Big 12 with a 10-2 record, 7-2 in conference play, with their losses coming against Kansas State and TCU. Finishing second in the Big 12, I've got Kansas State. So Kansas State was a team with very high preseason expectations last year, and I picked them to make the college football playoff. They didn't quite get there, but they were still good going 9-4. The expectations are very high once again this season for Kansas State. Quarterback Avery Johnson enters his second season as the starter, and if he can take a step forward and become more consistent, he has the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country, especially when you factor in what he can do as a runner. Now, speaking of running the ball, Kansas State will have to replace DJ Giddens, who ran for 1,300 yards last season, but I really like running back Dylan Edwards, and I think he should be in line for a big season after he ran for over 500 yards last year. In Kansas State, they also have a very good wide receiver one with Jace Brown, after he led the team in receiving yards last season. Now, the offensive line for Kansas State is a little bit of a question mark with 3 new starters, but that's pretty much the only question mark on this team because the defense is supposed to be good with 5 returning starters from a defense that was one of the Big 12's best last season. But I really like this Kansas State team. They have a lot of talent. They're more experienced than they are last year. And once again, this is a Kansas State team with potential to make the college football playoff. But I've got Kansas State going 10-2 in the regular season, 7-2 in conference play, losses to Baylor and Utah. And finishing at number 1 in the Big 12, I've got Arizona State. So Arizona State, they were one of the biggest surprises in the country last year, going from a team picked to finish near the bottom of the Big 12 to winning the conference and making the college football playoff. But this year, Arizona State is not being slept on at all, and they're supposed to be one of the best teams in the Big 12. I think they're going to have another great year. Quarterback Sam Leavitt, I think, is the best returning quarterback in the Big 12, and he's got a great go-to receiver in Jordan Tyson, and he returns after a big season last year with over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. Now, a big part of what Arizona State did offensively last year was on the ground with Cam Skattebo, and he's now in the NFL, and while they don't have another Cam Skattebo on their roster, I do still think their run game should be pretty good, especially after adding Army transfer Kanye Udo. And the offensive line for Arizona State is also quite good with 4 returning starters. Then defensively for Arizona State, they were solid last year, but I think they should be even better. They have a ton of experience with 9 returning starters, and I think they have the best defense in the Big 12. But Arizona State, they're set up for another trip to the Big 12 title game and potentially a college football playoff appearance. But I really like this Arizona State team, and I've got them going 11-1 in the regular season, 8-1 in conference play, only loss coming at Iowa State. Then in the Big 12 title game, we've got a really tough matchup between Kansas State and Arizona State. They don't play in the regular season, and I really have no idea which way this game would go. But I am going to take Arizona State. I think their defense is a little bit better, and I think that's the difference. But this game is pretty close to a coin flip. Moving on to our final conference, and that is the SEC. And finishing 16th or last in the SEC, I've got Mississippi State. So Mississippi State enters year 2 under Jeff Lebby, and year 1 was rough. They went just 2-10, and I think they could be a little bit better this year, but I still don't think Mississippi State is going to be very good. At the quarterback spot, they brought back Blake Shapen, who was solid last year before he got hurt. So at the very least, quarterback's pretty good. And I don't think running the ball will be terrible either, as they bring back their leading rusher from a season ago. Now, the rest of the offense, it doesn't look great. They lost 2 of their top 3 receivers from last year, and the offensive line is quite terrible. Then on the defensive side of the ball, they should be better, because they can't really get much worse than what they were last year, plus they brought in a ton of transfers. But this is a Mississippi State team that I still don't think is very good. I think they're on paper better than last year, but they're still going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC. And I've got Mississippi State finishing with a 3-9 record, and for the second straight year going winless in SEC play. I've got the 3 wins for for Mississippi State, coming against Southern Miss, Alcorn State, and Northern Illinois. Finishing 15th in the SEC, I've got Vanderbilt. So it might be a little surprising to see Vanderbilt, who was pretty solid last year, this low in the SEC standings. But I definitely think Vanderbilt has potential to have another good year. I just don't think they're going to be quite as good as they were last year. But they brought back some key players on the offensive side of the ball. Quarterback Diego Pavia was a huge part of last year's team. He's back. They also brought back running back Cedric Alexander and two good pass catchers with Junior Sherrill and Eli Stowers, who's arguably the best tight end in the country. Now, the big concern for this Vanderbilt offense is the offensive line, as they have 4 new starters. And on the defensive side of the ball, I think they should be pretty good. They were decent last year, and they bring back 7 starters. So I think they might be even better than they were. But I think Vanderbilt is going to be a very competitive team. I think they're going to be in a lot of close games with how good their defense is. I just don't see them winning a ton of them. I have them ending up 4-8, 1-7 in SEC play. Wins over Charleston Southern, Georgia State, Utah State, and Missouri. 14th in the SEC, I've got Kentucky. So Kentucky was bad last year, going just 4-8, and I don't see them being a whole ton better. Offensively, they added very experienced and well-traveled quarterback Zach Calzada, who has spent time at Texas A&M, Auburn, and Incarnate Word, and I think he should be solid for Kentucky. And at the running back spot, they're also pretty good with the return of Jamarian Wilcox, plus they added two transfers with Seth McGowan and Dante Dowdle. Now, the rest of the offense doesn't look great. At receiver, they lost some key players, although did bring in former Alabama transfer Kendrick Wall, and he should be one of the top targets for this offense, but then the offensive line is not very good. Now, defensively, Kentucky was not good last year. They went to the transfer portal and got some players who can make an impact right away, including former FCS star McQueese Humphrey Grace. But this is a Kentucky team with some potential, but I still don't see them being much better than they were last year. I've got them finishing with the same record at 4-8, 1-7 in SEC play. Wins over Toledo, Eastern Michigan, Tennessee Tech, and Vanderbilt. 13th in the SEC, I've got Missouri. Might be surprising to see them this low, but I do think they're going to take a step back. They went 10-3 last season and had a good year. Might be slightly disappointing considering they were supposed to be in the college football playoff race, but they still had a pretty good season. Well, I don't think Missouri will be nearly as good this year, because they lost a ton of key players. They lost quarterback Brady Cook, running back Nate Noel, and their top 2 receivers. So, it's going to be very difficult for them to replace all that production. But at the quarterback position, they added Penn State transfer Bo Perbula, and he's battling with Sam Horn for the starting job, and Missouri has not named a starting quarterback, and they don't plan to do so before week 1. If it were up to me and I was Missouri, I would start Bo Perbula because of what he can do as a runner, but I am interested to see what he can do as a passer, because he really never threw the ball at Penn State, which is 56 career pass attempts. Now, at running back, Missouri brought in transfer Ahmad Hardy from UL Monroe, and he ran for 1,300 yards and 13 scores last season. And the receiver position will be led by Mississippi State transfer Kevin Coleman. Now, defensively for Missouri, they are supposed to be pretty good. They were solid last year and brought back 7 starters, and also added some very talented transfers. But I can see this season for Missouri going a couple of different ways. Option 1 is the defense is great, the offense is not elite, but still very good, and Missouri is a very good team. Option 2 is the defense is great, and the offense never really finds a quarterback, which really holds them back, and Missouri misses the bowl game. I think there's potential for option 1, but I think option 2 is a lot more likely. And I have Missouri going 5-7, 1-7 in the SEC, with wins over Central Arkansas, Kansas, Louisiana, UMass, and Mississippi State. 12th in the SEC, I've got Auburn. So Auburn enters their 3rd year under Hugh Freeze, and the first 2 years have not been great, going 11-14. Now, this year I think could be a little bit better for Auburn, because on paper, this is the best team Hugh Freeze has had at Auburn. But the offense should be pretty good, but a lot of pressure is on the quarterback, Jackson Arnold. They brought him in from Oklahoma, and he's a former 5-star recruit in the class of 2023, but last year in his first year as a starter for Oklahoma, he wasn't great, and he got benched midway through the season. But maybe a fresh start can help Jackson Arnold, and if he can improve and live up to potential, then this Auburn offense could be really good, because they got a lot of playmakers around them. They got a good running back duo of UConn transfer Darrell Robinson, plus they have Damari Alston, and then at receiver, they brought in Georgia Tech transfer Eric Singleton, who's had at least 700 yards each of the last 2 years. and the offensive line should be pretty good as well, with 4 returning starters. Now, the defense for Auburn was pretty good last year, but they only returned 4 starters, but they were very active in the transfer portal, and I do expect this Auburn defense to be pretty good once again. But this is an Auburn team with a lot of potential, but I just don't think they're quite as good as some of the other teams in the SEC, and because of that, I've got them going 6-6. I've got them going 3-5 in the conference, and I've got them beating Ball State, South Alabama, Missouri, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Mercer. 11th in the conference, I've got Arkansas. So Arkansas won 7 games last year, which pretty much saved Sam Pittman's job, and now this year is going to be very interesting. Quarterback Taylor Green is back, and I like him. He's a good dual-threat quarterback, and if he can take a step forward in his second year as the Arkansas starter, I think he can be very good. The problem with Taylor Green is he's pretty inconsistent, and he likes to turn the ball over. But the playmakers around Taylor Green this year are pretty limited for Arkansas. They lost their leading rusher and their top 5 pass catchers. Now, they did go to the transfer portal to try to replace some of those, but that is just a lot of production to replace in one offseason. Then, defensively, it's pretty similar. They were solid last year, but don't have much returning, with just 3 returning starters. But Arkansas, they're a team with a lot of potential, but I don't see them being too great. I've got them going 6-6, 3-5 in conference play, with wins over Alabama A&M, Arkansas State, Memphis, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Missouri. Finishing 10th in the SEC, I've got Oklahoma. So they enter year 4 under Brent Venables, and they went 6-7 last year, and that definitely puts some pressure on Brent Venables as he enters this season, because the seat is probably pretty warm. But this is an Oklahoma roster that should be better than they were last year. At the quarterback spot, they get a major upgrade with Washington State transfer John Mateer, and he's a really exciting player. He's a dual threat, great passer, great runner, and he had 44 total touchdowns last season. Now, next to Mateer in the backfield, they got Cal transfer Jaden Ott, who battled injuries last year and wasn't great, but in his last healthy year in 2023, he had over 1,300 yards. Then the receiver position is a little bit of a question, but getting Deion Burks back healthy should definitely help. But I really like this offense, and I think it's a good mix of experience with young talent, and the offense should be pretty good. Definitely better than what they were last year. And then defensively for Oklahoma, I don't think they're going to be amazing, but I do think they'll be pretty solid. But I have Oklahoma finishing 10th in the SEC with a 7-5 record, 3-5 in conference play. Losses to Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Alabama, and LSU. 9th, I've got Tennessee. So Tennessee is a pretty interesting team entering this season. They went 10-2 last season and made the college football playoff before they got destroyed by Ohio State in the first round. But unfortunately for Tennessee, I don't see them being a playoff team this season. Quarterback Nico Iamaleava left in the transfer portal in the spring, and replacing him is former App State quarterback Joey Aguilar. And he's pretty good, but the only thing is he turns the ball over a lot, with 24 interceptions in his last 2 years combined. Then on the ground for Tennessee, I do think they will be pretty good, although they did lose their top running back Dylan Sampson, who was a touchdown machine last year. But the running back position still looks pretty good with Duke transfer Star Thomas, as well as returners Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop. Now, while the backfield is set, there is some questions outside for this Tennessee offense. They lost their top 3 receivers from last season, and this offensive line also has 4 new starters. Then on the defensive side of the ball, Tennessee was very good last year, and I think they're going to be pretty good once again. They did lose James Pierce Jr., who's a first-round pick in the NFL draft, but they still have a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and a very experienced secondary. But this is a Tennessee team that I think is going to be good, not great. I've got them going 8-4, 4-4 in conference play. Losses come against Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Florida. 8th, I've got South Carolina. So South Carolina had a very good year last year, going 9-4, and they should be pretty good once again. Quarterback Lenore Sellers is back, and he had a great second half of last season, and if he can build on that and become a better passer, he could be one of the top quarterbacks in the country. Now, outside of Lenore Sellers, there is some pretty big questions for this offense. At the running back spot, they lost Rocket Sanders, but Utah State transfer Rashul Faison should do a pretty good job replacing him, as he's run for a combined 1,800 yards in the last 2 years. Now, the receiver position is also a question, with 2 of their top 4 pass catchers no longer being on the team, but they do have Nick Harbor, who has a ton of potential. And the offensive line is also a little bit of a question with 3 new starters. Now, defensively, South Carolina was great last year, but they did lose several key players. But luckily for them, they do still have star defensive end Dylan Stewart, who had 6.5 sacks last year as a true freshman. Now, the defense is interesting because it's going to be interesting to see how South Carolina replaces what they lost. But there is still a ton of potential on defense and overall for South Carolina. I really think this season depends on how Lenora Sellers develops and how good he makes this offense, because I think he's good. I think some people tend to overrate him. He's not amazing right now. The potential is there, but I don't think he's an elite quarterback right now. But I think this year depends a lot on how good Lenora Sellers is and how good he can make this offense, plus how the defense looks. But I think South Carolina is going to be decent. I don't think they're a playoff team, but I've got South Carolina going 8-4, 4-4 in SEC play, with losses against LSU, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. Finishing 7th in the SEC, I've got Florida. So Florida's a team with really high preseason expectations this year, and we'll have to see if they can live up to them, but they definitely have potential to be very good. But last year, Florida, they had a really bad start, but they finished the year on a strong note, winning 4 straight, and Billy Napier saved his job. Now, maybe they can carry that momentum into this season. But a big reason Florida was so good over their final 4 games was quarterback DJ Wagway. He finished the year on a strong note, and as he enters this season, I think he can take that next step. And if DJ Wagway can take that next step, I think that's going to help Florida as a whole take that next step. But a big reason I think DJ Wagway will improve this year is there's a lot of talent around him. They returned their leading rusher from last year, and they did lose their top 2 receivers, but they have some talented young guys like Eugene Wilson and Aiden Mizell. And the offensive line is also going to be very good for Florida. The Florida defense also ended last year on a very strong note, and they have a good foundation this year with 5 returning starters. But this is a Florida team that can be very good. They've got a lot of potential on both sides of the ball, and I think they have the talent to make the college football playoff. Now, the problem in making the playoff for Florida is they have an impossible schedule. They have 7 preseason top 25 teams, and I do think they're good enough to win about half those, but that's not going to be enough to make the playoff. And I've got Florida going 8-4, 4-4 in the conference, with losses to LSU, Texas A&M, and Georgia. 6th in the SEC, I've got Ole Miss. Ole Miss is another interesting team entering this season. They lost a lot of key players from last year, but obviously Lane Kiffin does a great job in the transfer portal, and he did a pretty good job replacing them, although I do think Ole Miss will take a slight step back. But they lost quarterback Jackson Dart to the NFL, but lefty Austin Simmons has a ton of potential, and I think he should be pretty good, plus there's a lot of playmakers around him. As at running back, they've got former Notre Dame and LSU back Logan Diggs, and at receiver, they added Penn State transfer Harrison Wallace and Oklahoma State transfer Deshaun Stribble. And then on top of the 2 transfer receivers, they've also got Caden Lee in the slot, giving them a pretty good trio of starting receivers. Now, the offensive line for Ole Miss replaces a lot, and so does their defense, so I do think they'll take a step back there. But the offense has a lot of potential. Obviously, a lot depends on Austin Simmons, who's pretty unproven, but I like him. I think he's going to be pretty solid. And I've got Ole Miss going 9-3. 5-3 in conference play, with losses coming against LSU, Georgia, and Florida. 5th in the SEC, I've got Texas A&M. So A&M enters this season after a pretty good first year under Mike Elko as they went 8-5. And I really like this Texas A&M team. On the offensive side of the ball, quarterback Marcel Reed is back, and last year as a true freshman, he was pretty good. He was great as a runner, and the passing was pretty good. It can definitely get better, but it wasn't terrible at all. Now, I definitely think Marcel Reed can take that next step, and if he does, he's going to be an elite quarterback. Now, next to Reed at the running back position, Texas A&M has one of the best running back rooms in the country, as they have a great trio of Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, and Ruben Owens. Now, they do have some new faces at the receiver position, with their top 3 receivers from last season no longer being on the team, but they brought in NC State transfer Casey Concepcion and others, and they should be very good and give Marcel Reed some pretty reliable targets. And then up front for Texas A&M, they return all 5 starters along the offensive line, and the offensive line should be one of the best in college football. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, there is a lot to replace, especially along the defensive line, with Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, and Nick Scorton all being in the NFL. but Texas A&M still has plenty of talent to have one of the better defensive lines in the SEC and in the country as a whole. Now, the secondary could have been better for Texas A&M last season, but they're more experienced this year. They get a couple players back, and they should be pretty good. Well, I really like this Texas A&M team. I think I'm slightly higher on them than some others are, but I think this Texas A&M team can be really good. If Marcel Reed takes that next step, this offense is going to be elite. This defense should be pretty good. And I've got A&M going 10-2, 6-2 in SEC play, with their losses coming against LSU and Texas. Fourth in the SEC, I've got LSU. LSU is another team with very high preseason expectations this year, and for good reason. Offensively, they should be very good. Quarterback Garrett Nussmeier is one of the best returning quarterbacks in the country, and if he can have another great season, this offense is going to be very good. There's also a lot of talent around Garrett Nussmeier, as running back Caden Durham is back, and their leading receiver Aaron Anderson also returns. Plus, they brought in a couple of transfer receivers with Oklahoma transfer Nick Anderson and Kentucky transfer Barryon Brown. Now, the biggest concern offensively for LSU is 4 new starters along the offensive line. Otherwise, this offense should be one of the better offenses in college football. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, LSU wasn't great last year, but I do expect them to be a lot better. They have preseason All-American in Whit Weeks at linebacker. They get Harold Perkins back from a torn ACL, which cost them all of last year. And they brought in some talented transfers along the defensive line, such as Florida State transfer Patrick Payton. But this is an LSU team that has a ton of potential, and I definitely think they're good enough to make the college ball playoff under Brian Kelly for the first time. Now, the problem for LSU is in order to make the playoffs, they need to win at least one big game, and Brian Kelly does not like to do that. But LSU, they got a lot of potential. I've got them going 10-2, 7-1 in the conference with losses to Clemson and Alabama. Third in the SEC, I've got Alabama. So Alabama had a down year for their standards last year, finishing 9-4 in their first year without Nick Saban, and that was their worst year since 2007. But Alabama should be a little bit better this season. They're led by quarterback Ty Simpson, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but with the amount of talent around him on this offense, he doesn't even need to be amazing, he just needs to be not bad. But at the running back spot, they brought back their top running back from last season in Jam Miller, and at receiver, they've got obviously Ryan Williams, one of the best in the country. Plus, they've also got Gurman Bernard, who I think is one of the most underrated receivers in the country. And then up front, the offensive line is quite good, led by arguably the best lineman in college football in Caden Proctor. Now, defensively for Alabama, they're also very good, and they've got a great combination of experience and talent. But this defense should be one of the better defenses in the country, and Alabama as a whole is one of the best teams on paper in the country. I do think the quarterback position might hold them back slightly because, as I said, I'm not the biggest fan of Ty Simpson, and I think he could hold Alabama back from reaching their full potential, but this is still a really good Alabama team, and I've got them going 11-1, 7-1 in conference play, with their only loss coming at Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, I've got them finishing second in the SEC. They got very high expectations entering this season, and I think they might be slightly overrated. I know that sounds weird to say about Georgia, but I'll explain. They lost quarterback Carson Beck, and obviously he wasn't great last year, but who knows what you're going to get with him. So he could have been great, who knows. But they replaced him with Gunnar Stockton, who I'm not the biggest fan of. I think he can be good, but from what we saw of him last year, which obviously wasn't much, but I wasn't overly impressed. Now, the receivers for Georgia also aren't great. Dylan Bell leads the returning receivers, and they also added USC transfer Zachariah Branch, who's amazing with the ball in his hands. Plus, they added Texas A&M transfer Noah Thomas, but overall, I don't think any of these receivers are going to be truly elite. I think they'll all be pretty good, but no one's truly going to be that true wide receiver one. Then on the ground for Georgia, it was not good enough last year, and they need to be better. Running back Nate Frazier did have a pretty good true freshman year with 671 yards, but he does run behind a brand new offensive line with 4 new starters. Now, defensively for Georgia, they lost key players on all 3 levels, but despite that, I'm not really worried because Georgia always is good on defense. But I do think this Georgia team is still very good. And when I say slightly overrated, I don't think Georgia's bad. I just think they're not quite as good as some people like to say they are. But this is still a very good Georgia team. But I've got Georgia going 11-1, overall 7-1 in conference play, with their 1 loss coming at home against Texas. And that would snap what is right now a 31-game home winning streak. And finishing atop the SEC, I've got Texas. Texas, they're going to be really good this year. They're the preseason #1 team in the AP poll for a reason, and they're going to be really good. Arch Manning takes over at quarterback, and I agree with most and think he's going to be an elite quarterback. And they've also got a ton of playmakers around Arch Manning. They have a great running back duo with C.J. Baxter, who's back from injury after missing all of last season. Plus, they've got breakout star Trey Wisner. Now, Texas did lose their top 3 targets from last season, but they still have plenty of playmakers on the outside, led by DeAndre Moore and Ryan Wingo, who I think is going to take that next jump to becoming a top 5 to 10 receiver in college football. Now, really the only concern for Texas in pretty much the entire team is the offensive line with 4 new starters, but otherwise this offense is going to be very good. Defensively for Texas, they were elite last year, and they're going to be elite once again. They did lose some key players, but they also returned some very important players. Linebacker Anthony Hill Jr. is one of the best defensive players in the country, and they've also got a great edge duo with Trey Moore and Colin Simmons. And in the secondary, they're also extremely good, led by Malik Murphy and All-American Michael Taffet. Probably said that wrong. But this is a Texas team that I think is going to be elite. As long as the offensive line can figure it out, they're going to be probably the best team in college football. But I have Texas going 11-1, overall 8-0 in conference play, only lost week 1 at Ohio State. And in the SEC championship game, we've got Georgia against Texas. This is really tough, but I'm going to take Texas. I think they've probably got the best team in the country heading into the season. Obviously, this is after the season, but I do think Texas is the better overall team. And as I said, I don't think Georgia's quite as good as some people like to say they are. I think Texas is the better team, and I've got them winning the SEC. Now, moving on to my prediction for Notre Dame. So, Notre Dame, they're coming off an extremely good 2024 season where they made it all the way to the national championship game. And they should definitely be right back in the national championship conversation once again. On the offensive side of the ball, they lost quarterback Riley Leonard, but C.J. Carr's been named the starting quarterback, and I think he's going to be really good. Then at the running back spot, Notre Dame's got the best running back duo in the country with Heisman candidate Jeremiah Love, as well as Jadarian Price. And then receiver is also a lot stronger for Notre Dame than it has been in previous years after they brought in Virginia transfer Malachi Fields, plus they've got college football playoff breakout star Jaden Greathouse. And then up front, this offensive line is going to be really good. Then shifting to the defense, they're going to be elite. They did lose defensive coordinator Al Golden, but they hired former Rutgers head coach, Chris Ash, and he's got a ton of talent to work with on this defense. They lost a few key players, but they've got a ton of talent at all 3 levels. The pass defense should be great, led by preseason All-American Leonard Moore, and this Notre Dame defense is going to be one of the best in the country. Now, I do have Notre Dame going 11-1. As a Notre Dame fan, I would love to put them going 12-0, but it is just so hard to go undefeated. Plus, Notre Dame's got a pretty tough schedule, so I am going to put them at 11-1 with their one loss coming at home against Texas A&M. Now, my Heisman winner, it's tough to pick a Heisman winner because there's a lot of good options. Cade Klubnik, Arch Manning, some other quarterback, or you've even got non-quarterback options like Jeremiah Love or Jeremiah Smith. But I got Cade Klubnik winning the Heisman. I think he's the best returning quarterback in college football. I think he's the best quarterback in college football. He's going to have a great year. Clemson's going to be really good, and Cade Klubnik is my winner of the 2025 Heisman Trophy. Moving on to my college football playoff predictions, and we'll start by going over what teams are actually in the playoff. But my number 1 seed, I have the 13-0 Big Ten champs, Ohio State. Second seed, I have Texas at 12-1, champions of the SEC. 3 seed, I have Clemson at 12-1, winning the ACC. And number 4 seed is Arizona State at 12-1, winning the Big 12. Now, I know you don't need to be a conference champion anymore to get a top 4 seed and a first-round bye, but that is how I think it'll play out. Obviously, Ohio State's a lock to get a bye if they're unbeaten. And then if you have 3 other one-loss conference champions, I think it's a pretty safe bet they're going to get the top 4 seeds. Now, my number 5 seed is Georgia at 11-2. My number 6 seed is Penn State at 11-2. My 7th seed is Alabama at 11-1. 8th seed Notre Dame at 11-1. My 9th seed is Oregon, also at 11-1. 10th seed I have LSU at 10-2. My 11th seed is Texas A&M at 10-2. And the 12th team, this team would be the Group of 5 champ because I don't have a Group of 5 team in it yet. And there's definitely some options. I mean, you got Boise State, Memphis, Tulane, James Madison, or somebody else, but I'm going to roll with Boise State. I still think they're the best Group of 5 team. They lost Ashton Jeanty and definitely aren't going to be as good, but Quarterbacks Maddox Madsen is back, as are a lot of key players from last year's team. And I got Boise State at the 12 seed, being the Group of 5 representative in the college football playoff. Now, you may be a little confused why I've got Georgia and Penn State as 2-loss teams over Alabama, Notre Dame, and Oregon. And I'm just going based off what the committee did last year. They had a 2-loss Texas and Penn State team over a 1-loss Notre Dame team when they did it last year, and they don't like to penalize conference championship losers. So I'm just going based on that. Although I do think it makes much more sense to have the 1-loss teams ahead of the 2-loss teams. But just going based on what the committee did last season. But we get into my predictions for the first round. First game, we got Boise State at Georgia. So, as I just said with Boise State, I think they're going to be good. Not as good as they were last year. And I'm not the highest in Georgia, but Georgia is the better team here. I think they'll win this game fairly convincingly. And I've got Georgia moving on with a win by at least 15 to 20 points. Then we got Oregon at Notre Dame. I got Notre Dame here. I think Oregon is good. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. I think Notre Dame might be better than they were last year. I got Notre Dame moving on. Texas A&M at Penn State. This is an interesting one. I really like this Texas A&M team, but Penn State is also really good. Now, obviously, it would require Penn State to win a big game here, but I am going to take Penn State. They are at home. I think they're too good to lose in the first round. Plus, you have a team from the South in Texas A&M coming up north to Pennsylvania in the middle of December, where it's probably going to be pretty cold. So I'll take Penn State to move on. In our final first round matchup, we got LSU at Alabama. This is another interesting one. LSU makes the playoff the first time under Brian Kelly, although he's never won a college football playoff game because he doesn't win big games. Now, LSU definitely has the advantage at the quarterback position in this matchup. I would take Garrett Nussmeier over Ty Simpson 10 times out of 10 heading into the season. Might say differently at the end of the season, but right now I would definitely take Garrett Nussmeier. But while LSU has the advantage at the quarterback position, I am still going to take Alabama. The better team outside the quarterback spot, plus they're at home. And I got Alabama moving on. Now we move on to the quarterfinals, beginning with Georgia against Arizona State. And this is a really tough one, because I think Georgia is probably the more talented team, but I really like this Arizona State team. I think their offense is very good, their defense is very good. And I definitely think they have what it takes to beat Georgia, but I am going to take Georgia to get the win. I mean, I'm not going to bet against Kirby Smart right here. I think Georgia's probably the more talented team, as I said, and I got Georgia in a close game. Next, we have Notre Dame and Ohio State. This is one of the toughest games for me to pick in the entire video. It's a rematch of the national championship game from last season. Plus, if Notre Dame and Ohio State play, it'll actually be the 4th consecutive season where they match up against one another, with Ohio State winning the first 3. But this is a really tough game to predict. Both these teams are extremely similar to last year's teams, which obviously made the national championship game. Both have a lot of key talent returning outside the quarterback position, but both quarterbacks are young but very good. But Notre Dame, they've got to beat Ohio State at some point. Why not now? I think they actually have the slightly better defense, and I think they may have the advantage with how effective I think their run game will be. So I'm going to take Notre Dame to beat Ohio State, but toughest game for me to pick. Also, might be slightly biased as a Notre Dame fan, but tried to take all bias out, and I still think Notre Dame definitely has a very good chance to win. Moving on to Penn State against Clemson. This is another very tough game. I think both these teams are really good, but I have Clemson. They have the slight advantage at the quarterback position. Obviously, I think Cade Klubnik's going to win the Heisman. I think both defenses are elite. Penn State might be slightly better, but I think Cade Klubnik and this Clemson offense are good enough. Plus, I really like this Clemson front 7 to slow down the Penn State run game. So I'll take Clemson to move on. In the final quarterfinal game, we've got Alabama and Texas. Another great game, but I've got Texas. Texas, they're the better overall team. Alabama, very good team. Texas, just better. And I've got Texas advancing. Then in the semifinals, we've got Notre Dame and Georgia. A rematch from the Sugar Bowl last year. In that game, Notre Dame won 23-10. And I'm going to take Notre Dame again. I think they're better than Georgia. We've seen Notre Dame can beat Georgia. Obviously, different teams, but same idea. But I have Notre Dame beating Georgia. I've got them making the national championship game for the 2nd straight season. And something I will say about about this part of the bracket, if it plays out this way, or how I have it, I think the winner of Notre Dame and Ohio State makes the national championship game, because I think either team will beat Georgia or Arizona State. I got Notre Dame over Georgia. Then the other semifinal, we've got Texas and Clemson. Another rematch of a playoff game we saw last year. In that game, Texas won 38-24. I think this game should be much better than that game. This game can definitely go either way. I think it depends on if Texas can protect Arch Manning. We saw that was a big theme in big games last year for Texas not being able to protect Quinn Ewers. Now you've got a newer offensive line that's not as experienced, although by this point in the season they will be more experienced, and we will have a good idea on if they're good or not. But obviously that is a big part of this game, especially with how good Clemson's defensive line is. But this is a very tough game to predict. I got Clemson. They got the more experienced quarterback. I do think Arch Manning is going to be elite, but Cade Klubnik, I think, is the best quarterback in the country. He's going to have the best season. And I've got Clemson making it to the national championship game. In the national title game, Notre Dame and Clemson. Notre Dame in the national championship game for the second straight year, and this time they play Clemson. And this is a game that could definitely go either way. Obviously, as a Notre Dame fan, I would love to pick Notre Dame to win the national championship. I think they have an extremely good team and definitely should be in that national championship conversation, but I'm going to take Clemson to win. I think this Clemson team is actually a little underrated entering this season, which sounds crazy to say considering they're a top, I think, 5 team. But I really like this Clemson team. Cade Klubnik, I've talked about him a bunch over the past few minutes, is really good. They got a great group of receivers. Dabo Swinney's been there before and won a national championship, multiple actually. This defense is really good. I got Clemson as my 2025-2026 college football national champion. But those are my 2025 college football predictions. I've put a ton of time and effort into this video, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. But thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. And also let me know who you guys think will win the national championship down below. But thank you guys for watching. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.